All right, hey everyone, welcome back. We start with class now. So just a few reminders before we start. We have PA2 that's due tonight. If you guys have any questions or something, just come up to us after class and you can ask. You can also use your slip days on those. So you have up to 3 slip days for an assignment and 6 total slip days. And then PA3, which is going to be based on the demo today, will be due Monday, this coming Monday. And you can use the slip days for those too. So yeah. All right. So today's demo is going to be basically like further like extending the demo 2 code. So you can find the source code on the actual course website and just download it. I'm just going to use my terminal to pull it up right now. So open your terminal, you can CD into your desktop or wherever you have it downloaded, and then you can just open that up and then code dot will open it up in Visual Studio. And then before we start anything, I'm just going to create my virtual environment. So I can just open a new terminal here. I'll do Python 3-m then to create the virtual environment. And then .ven bin activate are the equivalent on Windows to activate it, and then pip3 install -r requirements. And then now we're ready to actually start the assignment. So if you guys remember from demo 2, we were implementing like a task model. And now we're just gonna add in like a subtask for each task. So basically, each task is gonna have certain subtasks that'll go along with it. So like you have your task of doing homework, and then a subtask might be doing CS 2110 homework or doing whatever class homework. So before we begin, if you guys remember from lecture, we had the 3 different types of relationships. We had one-to-many, many-to-many, and one-to-one. So does anyone know what type of relationship we're going to be implementing today with the task to subtask model? Just a reminder, like one task can have multiple subtasks underneath it. So yep, exactly, yeah. So again, an easy way to remember that is a task can have many subtasks. A subtask can only have one task. So that's just an easy way to remember one-to-many. So we're going to be creating that one-to-many relationship today. Does anyone remember the special type of key we use to do that? Starts with an F. Foreign key, exactly. And the thing that differentiates a one-to-one from a one-to-many is that a one-to-many or a one-to-one has a unique constraint, whereas a one-to-many does not. So we'll be getting into that a little bit shortly. So the first thing I want to go over is that like app.py looks a little bit different from what you guys have been used to. We have these 2 new functions called success response and failure response. Those are just like ways to just abstract our code, make it easier for us. So instead of typing json.dumps, open parentheses, open this curly braces, whatever, we can just call this method and just give in a string, which will just say success, give that, or the failure and give that. And then of course we can customize the actual code that's given to. So now we can actually go into creating the subtasks. So if we hop on over to the db.py, again, we have this is just the default code from before. We have our create task table, delete task table, get all tasks, insert task, get task, update, and delete. So the way we usually implement this type of one-to-many relationship, we're going to have 2 different tables. So we already have our first table, which is our task table. And then we'll create another one for the subtasks, and then we'll link them together with the foreign key. So we can do that now just by creating a new function called create subtask table, which is going to be very similar to this. So def create subtask table. And that'll take in self because it's let me switch off GitHub Copilot. So first, I just want to document the code. So using SQL, we create a subtask table. And then again, make sure you guys are documenting your actual code in your assignments, just so for clarity and for the styling. And then to create this table, it's going to be very similar to the actual create task table. So I'm just going to copy this down actually. And then the key differences here is that First, we want to change this to if not exists. So that means we don't want to create like a new table if there's already a subtask table already there. We can name this one subtask. It'll have the same integer ID primary key auto increment. That's basically the unique identifier that we always use. It'll have a description. It'll have a done. And then now this is going to be the actual foreign key part where we link the two. So the way we do that is we just create any column. It can be named anything. In this, we'll just do task ID. And this is also going to be an integer and then not null. So right now we have 4 columns in the database, but we don't know that, we didn't tell SQL that it's going to be a foreign key. And the way we kind of do that is by typing foreign key and then in parentheses, like the name of the column that's going to be, so task ID, and then references. So, and then we want to reference the actual table column. And the way we do that is the name of the other table. So tasks, just check that. Yeah, tasks. Good bug. I'll just change this to subtasks actually. And then here we can do ID right here. And then we can save that. And then this way we know that the new task ID column is going to be consisting of only foreign keys that reference an actual task. And then since we want to create the actual table, we can just add this new table, like this new method to our constructor right here. So it'll be called every time this database driver object is created. So now if we go ahead and run this app, so Python 3 and then app.py, we should see our new todo.db table here, the new file created. And that's basically just consisting of our 2 tables. And then obviously with this new subtask table, we want to actually be able to insert some subtasks into there. So I'll come down here. I'm just going to do it right underneath the actual insert for the first one. So def insert subtask. I'll take in a self, it'll take a description, take a done. And then the new thing that we add here is the actual task ID that it references, right? Because each subtask needs to be associated with some task. So we'll take that in as a parameter as well. And then first we'll just comment something. So using SQL adds a new subtask into the subtask table. Again, these descriptions can be pretty basic. It's just detailing what your code actually does. So very similar to the one above. So again, the cursor is just basically the spot you are in the database. So it's just like a way of interacting with the database. So self.con.execute, this is where we write our actual SQL command. And then a question last class, actually. So in Python, there's like basically 3 different types of quotes. There's your standard, like these, the double quotes, so you can write anything in there. There's your also single quotes, you can write anything in there. And there's also triple quotes, which is called a docstring. The reason we use docstrings is just for readability wise, just so you guys can actually see it. But it actually doesn't matter which type of string you guys use. The thing about docstrings is that you can like type on different lines and they'll all be considered different in part of the same string. So that's why we kind of use those. So I'll just use a docstring here. So insert into subtasks, because that's the actual name for a table. And then the actual columns that we're inserting into. So description, done, task, ID, and the values, which we'll give as question marks right here. And then we'll pass in the actual tuple of description, done, and the task ID. And then of course we want to save these changes. So self.commit, and then return cursor dot last row ID. And that's basically what it's going to do is just grab the ID of the very last thing you inserted. So in this case, it'll just grab the new ID of the thing you just inserted and return that. So you can save that. And now to actually check if what we did like actually works, we'll need a way of getting the task that we created. So come down here. So right under the get task, we'll create a get subtask by ID, takes in itself, and it takes in the ID. Then again, let's just comment that. So using SQL gets a subtask by its ID. And then it's going to be very similar. You'll find that pretty common when working with like databases. A lot of the CRUD operations, so create, retrieve, update, delete, they're all going to look very similar. So let's just do cursor equals self dot execute, and then select all from subtasks where ID equals blank question mark. And then we will provide it the ID. And another question that was brought up last class is why we have this extra trailing comma at the end. So the way Python kind of interprets tuples with only one element is like, if I didn't have this comma here, it would evaluate ID because it's in parentheses, right? So that would be the equivalent of saying this, which is not really what we want because this is just the ID value and we want actually a tuple of the ID value. So that's kind of why we do that. And then, yeah, so we select that. And then for row in cursor, we return a dictionary with ID equals to the actual ID we gave in, description, is row 1, done 2. What's it?
You have an extra comma.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I had extra comma here, but. And then task ID. Row 3. And then we can return none at the very end. Okay, it just formatted like that. But basically what this code is doing, it's selecting everything, every like value that has ID equals to the ID we passed in. And the reason why we kind of do that is that there's either going to be 0 or 1 element that this query will return. Because since every element has a unique ID, there will always either be only 1 or there'll be none. If there's none, that means there's nothing in the database with that ID, right? So it kind of handles that error exception. And that's why we return immediately for like, we don't iterate through the entire cursor object. We just return at the very first time that we have an actual row in the cursor. And then since if there was no like task subtask that had that ID, it would skip this iterator and just return none at the end. So that kind of error checks for us. And now that we actually made these functions, we can go ahead and just write the root in app.py. So come down here. I'll just add it to the very end. So we create app.root, and then there will be at tasks. We'll have an integer that corresponds to the actual task ID, and then subtasks. And then this will take the methods of host because this is going to be our function to actually create a new subtask. So get create subtask. Takes in the task ID from the URL. And then let's just comment this first. So endpoint with ID task ID. And then this is going to be pretty standard. So of course, since it's a post request, we want to get the actual data that's in the request. So we grab the body. So JSON.loads, request.data. And then we want to grab that description equals body.get description. And then of course, if we go back to the DB, the actual table, one subtask has a description, a done field, a task ID, and the actual ID field. So this very first one is automatically done by the database, so we didn't need to worry about that. Description is what we just got from the body. And then done is always going to be set to false because when you create a subtask, obviously it's not done yet. So we're just going to initialize it to false immediately. Then task ID, you guys will see, since we have them saying the actual task specified in the URL, we can add that directly here. So I'll show you guys that now. So here's the description. And then task, we want to get the actual task to make sure it exists in the database because you can't add a subtask to something that doesn't exist. So get task by ID, and we feed in the task ID. And then we want to check if it actually exists. So none, return failure response. And this is kind of what I was talking about before, where the actual like thing is abstracted away. So we can just call this function and give it a string and it'll handle everything for us. Otherwise we'd have to do like return json.dumps and then give it like error, and then whatever here. There's a lot more work. So we just kind of abstracted that away so that it's easier. So now we know task actually is referring to an actual like valid task. So then we can just grab we can create our new subtask. So subtask ID equals insert subtask. We give it the description we just made. We initialize that one to false because that's the done field. And then we give it the task ID. And we want to make sure that it was created successfully. So now that we have that new insertion, we want to actually get it. And then just checking if it actually was made successfully. So we just check if this is none. And we return failure response. But create subtask. And then this here, we can just specify a different error code, which kind of makes our lives easier. If you come back up to the failure, like the response, it takes in 2. The string is the message that we put initially. And then code, if we don't provide it, it defaults to 404, which 404 means not found. But in this case, since it's something like, since like we weren't able to do it on our backend, we return a 400. And then finally, if it's able to get through all of these, we can just return the success response because we know it's been successfully created. Subtask, and then whenever something's created, you want to return to 201. And then we can go ahead and test this in Postman. So open up Postman. Let's delete all of these. Create a new collection. Let's just say PA2, PA3 demo. Let's add a new request. So let's call this create subtask. And then I'm just going to grab this URL here. So we're hitting this route right now. Since we just created a new one, we won't actually have any tasks like in our database already. So we're expecting this one to fail. So if I just send this, I'll give it a description first. Description. Do I'll go homework. And we're sending this. Oh, sorry, this should be a post. We get task not found, basically meaning since we don't have any tasks already there, our error checkings are working and we can't add a new subtask to a task that doesn't exist. So let's go in and actually create a new task. So we already implemented that route before in up here. So let's just grab this one to actually create the task. So change that to post. And then in our actual body, this will take in description. So our task is going to be called do homework, and then our subtasks are going to be the different types of homework we have. So algo, CS2110, stuff like that. So do homework. You can send that. And then we see, since it returned this, that we know that there actually exists a new task. And then we can come up here. We can change the ID to 1, actually. And then we can add that. And now we can grab all our tasks at the, well, we can add another route to actually get the actual tasks we added. And then you guys can see the actual power of a one-to-many. Whereas I can just grab our task and all the subtasks will follow with it in the actual Postman. So we can go ahead and do that. So let's add that, like getting a new task, getting subtasks of a specific task. So dot root, then tasks, ID. So it's hitting the same route as this up here, but now instead of posts, we're going to be doing a get request. So get subtasks task takes in the task ID the same way it did before. Just comment that first, endpoint. Right, endpoint for getting all tasks, subtasks for a task with ID, task ID. So then we just want to do the same thing. So we grab the actual task from our database. Get task ID, we give it the actual task ID. Then we check if it actually exists. So this is the case if it doesn't exist. Right, and then now that we know it exists, we return the success response. And then we can kind of like wrap this like that. db.get subtasks.
No function for ADB.
Yeah.
So you have to like create.
Yeah. So we're gonna go ahead and implement the actual function. So subtasks of task ID, and then we'll go ahead and implement the actual function in db.py. We'll come down here to the bottom. So let's write that function we just called. So subtasks. So just commenting that gets all subtasks. Task ID. And now this, of course, is going to be very similar again to getting it before. And so I kind of want to ask you guys, what do you guys think the SQL query should be? Because we know for getting, we're obviously going to use the select command. So select all from subtasks. And then where, what do you guys think this new condition should be? So just to give an example, for a different get method, where it gets subtask by ID, this is getting a specific subtask given the subtask ID. And we have select all from subtasks where their ID equals that. So what do you guys think it would be the equivalent for here? Yep.
The task ID.
Exactly. So as you said, task ID equals question mark. The reason we do that is because we want to select a specific column. So that's going to be our first thing. And if we look up, we are given a task ID, and in our actual database, we created this task ID column. So we can kind of do exactly how he said. What was your name, by the way? Sorry? Prati? Yep. We'll do what Prati said. That's our actual command. And then we can give in the task ID over here. And then again, since it's only a single element in a tuple, we need that trailing comma. So that's good. We have our cursor now. So now we've selected the actual subtasks. And now we want to iterate. I have an extra comma again. It's my formatter. It's that extra comma doesn't actually matter too much, but now we actually, since we have all of these subtasks in our cursor, now we want to iterate through that and actually be able to return those in a JSON format. So it's subtask equals that, and then for row in cursor, we want to append these like JSON objects. So ID is row 0. Description is row at index 1. Done at row 2, and task ID at index 3. And it may seem confusing first why we're actually using these indices. So to give you like a better example, if you guys remember like our Excel sheet analogy, basically when you have a table, each column, so if I use the subtask table, for example, so we're creating an Excel sheet called subtask at the very top, and we have 4 columns within it. We have an ID, which is the very left, description, done, and then task ID. And that's kind of mirrored in the actual row in the cursor. So when a database selects it, it'll select an entry that has an ID, description, done, task ID in that order, which means if I were to change this around, if this done were to, I don't know what I just did. If this done were to come up here, then we'd have to go in and change this to be the second element and this to be the first. So that's kind of where those numbers come from. So let me just undo all of that. Yeah. So now we actually have our subtasks, and then we can finally just simply return the subtasks. And now we can actually test our new method in Postman, this new get subtask of a task. So I'll just copy that over. So I'll use this. Say that here. This is going to be a get request, and we feed in a task ID. So before we already created that task ID with ID 1. So now let's go ahead and get that task after we created it here. So basically what this should kind of return is that we're asking for all subtasks of task 1. So it should now return that do your algo homework, which is right here. This one task right here. And now we can kind of create a new subtask here. So instead of doing algo, we can do like CS2110. And we can create that new one. And now when we get this, it should be a list with the first subtask being here and the second subtask being right here. And now finally, the last method we're going to implement is getting all tasks. So basically, now that we have our actual subtasks, when we get all tasks, let's try to get the subtask along with the actual task now. So now we have the 2 different layers within it. So if we scroll back up to our def, like get all tasks, or I'll just create a new one right here. Def get all tasks, takes in self, then using SQL, gets all tasks in the task table. And now, again, it's going to be very similar to what you've seen before. So self.con that, I'm sorry, this is in the wrong file. So I'm just going to copy this over to db.py. So copying that over. So self.con to execute. Let's just do select all from tasks. So basically what this is doing is getting everything from the task table. And now that we've said like we've created a new table that has a foreign key to it, this select, first off, it selects everything in the tasks, and it also selects everything that's linked to those tasks. So in this one statement, we have every task and subtask. And now we can kind of iterate through those. So let's make a new list of tasks. for row and cursor, task.append. And then it'll have an ID, which is again the row 0. Description, which is row 1. Done. And then we can just cast this to a Boolean because we know it's a true or false value. So we can just cast it right here, row 2. And then this is the actual new part, the subtask part. Since this new one has, like, we now have like access to all the subtasks, we can just call the actual get subtask method, get subtasks, task at row. That should be it. I think you wrote that wrong.
Row 0.
Row 0.
Yeah, row 0 is the ID.
Yeah. So now we're getting all the tasks associated with this. We're getting all the subtasks associated with this task. And then finally, we can just return tasks here. And then we can come back up here. So we see that we call this method get all tasks here. So let's go in and delete the first one that we created. So this is our first one in demo 2 that doesn't have the subtask. So I'm just going to comment all of that out. So now we know like this new method is the one that's being called. So now we can finally just go ahead and test this in Postman. So let me just grab this. So this is going to be the one to get like every task that we create. So we can send this. It should just say the one task we created and then the 2 subtasks underneath it, which is exactly what it says here. But now if we were to create a new subtask, a new task, so create a new task. Does anyone have any tasks in mind you want to write down? Anyone have any prelims or anything coming up? So we can, for prelims, you can create that as a new task. And of course, this one has a new ID of 2. So let's create some subtasks for that. So does anyone have any prelims soon? Lineage. Okay, let's create that. There we go. Does anyone have another prelim coming up? Sorry, Calc 3. Let's save that one. And then you had your hand up? Yeah. Oh. Does anyone else? One more exam coming up. And 3410. So now we've created 2 tasks. Under the first task was you do your homework. The second task is now study for prelims. And now I can go ahead and send this get all tasks. And let me just format this. We can see that our first task, ID 1, do homework. And then within it, we have 2 subtasks right here. Let me just. And now we have our second task, and that has the associated subtasks here. So that's kind of like the power of the one-to-many relationship and using like relational databases, where you can just simply get everything associated with one entry and return all of that in just one response.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
What scenarios would you situations?
Yeah, so good question. So basically what that method does is whenever you're modifying data, so adding, inserting, updating, or deleting any data in the database, you want to call that to save your changes. So it's kind of like when you use Microsoft Word, right? You make changes on a document, but it's not saved until you Control S. Kind of the same way with the database. That's when you call the commit method. Yeah, so I'll show you that. So last row ID. So basically in this one, we're inserting data, right? So we're modifying our database. We're inserting that element and now we're saving that. So that basically means this new table has been updated. You can't change anything now. And now last row ID, basically just that newest entry you just added. Since it's an auto incrementing, basically means it'll have like the biggest ID kind of. And what this does is just return that back to us. So it just grabs the last one. And we just return that just for like ease of use kind of. Yep. Great questions though. Anyone else? Yeah, so that concludes the demo. We can just hop into the Kahoot now. So